Capoeira is a rhythmic fighting style with Brazilian origins that combines elements of dance and aerobics with lots of kicking. The hands are mostly involved in giving the body momentum for even more kicks. We've seen the style in a few major fighting games, which has led to the pretty frequent suggestion for me to cover the best fighting game characters that adopted the ways of Capoeira. Despite Capoeira being very recognizable based on the active idle stance of its users and its very kick-centric playstyle, it's not that common among mainstream fighting games, meaning this list will be dominated by a few key series that love it. I'll be judging these characters based on how fun their moveset is in representing Capoeira and their overall backstory. So let's begin the top 10 Capoeira fighting game characters. Number 10, Tiger Jackson from Tekken. Tiger Jackson is a character in Tekken that exists, and that's really the extent of his character. He appeared in Tekken 3 with no backstory and only shows up in the tag tournament games beyond that. He's a disco dancer that I feel only exists because Capoeira is similar to dancing, so it made sense to make him a model swap of the main Capoeira fighter in Tekken, Eddie Gordo. His appearance was actually an unused Eddie Gordo design, so it seems the Tekken team liked his look so much that they made him a bonus character. And they really seem to have high hopes for him since they put him in as a guest character in the party game Pac-Man Fever, calling him one of the alleged famous Namco characters. Heihachi and Tiger Jackson, the faces of Tekken. No one was ever sure if the old Tiger was his own character or just an alternate ego for Eddie, like Violet for Lee, but Tekken Tag 2 made him a separate character slot for once, making that enough confirmation for me that he's different. Tiger Jackson. Maybe it's a Krusty the Clown Homer Simpson scenario, where they were supposed to be the same character initially, but the concept was dropped, so now you just have two characters with similar attributes. Either way, his moveset may have had nothing unique when comparing it to the main Capoeira fighters in Tekken, but at least he brings the funk to the roster. You win. Number 9, Trident from Eternal Champions. Eternal Champions is a game with a whole bunch of edgy, wacky characters who are fighting to be revived from the dead. I mean, you had the likes of barbarians and vampires and cyborgs all fighting with a few crazy attacks. It was like Sega's Darkstalkers. And just like how Darkstalkers had a Fishman, Eternal Champions had the Atlantean Trident. When I look at Trident, I expect him to just have a no-nonsense brawling moveset with no true fighting technique. He has a trident for a hand, that's the only fighting style he needs. But apparently, the manual for the Sega Genesis game says his fighting style is Capoeira. I guess his kicks kinda resemble Capoeira now that you mention it, but why did they choose that for him? I know they had to list a martial arts style for all the fighters, but not everything had to be by the book. The caveman just had pain listed for his. Why didn't they just do something fictional for this Atlantean? They could have at least chosen something that was around when he was alive in 110 BC. How did he learn Capoeira in 110 BC? It wasn't even created yet. Brazil wasn't even created yet. This one word printed in a manual confused me more than any backstory ever has. Number 8, Richard Meyer in Fatal Fury. Richard was only a computer opponent in the original Fatal Fury and never returned playable in later Fatal Fury games, even when other formerly non-playable opponents were eventually playable, like Duck King or Billy. Because of that, his moveset was never improved upon initially. He just had a very basic kick-themed moveset that you'd expect from the original stilted animations of the first Fatal Fury. He finally got a playable appearance in King of Fighters Maximum Impact 2, which was the 3D Arena King of Fighters spin-off. Those games have always been separate from the canon of the main series games, so in the grand scheme of the story, he has been largely inactive since the first Fatal Fury and all throughout the King of Fighters series. But I actually like his role in the series beyond his fighting. He's made a great career of being a background character. His reason for participating in the first tournament was to advertise his restaurant, the Pow Pow Cafe. I'm not sure how he did that while fighting. Like, did he just kick his opponent in the face and say, "Eat at my cafe, it's delicious"? And then Terry was like, huh, it really is delicious. And Richard didn't just appear in Terry's ending in later games, his cafe was a stop for Duck King and Andy too. He also remained relevant by taking on a student in a later Fatal Fury game, but I'll get to that guy later. The Pow Pow Cafe continued to appear in the background of various King of Fighters stages, and a Capoeira show is going on there too. How relevant. Learning this style has done wonders for his business. The cafe is still a success today, appearing as the celebration location for the women fighters team in King of Fighters 13 and 14. Not only do the main three from the team appear, but you see business is booming as we get cameos from fighters on previous rosters that would make my top 10 list of characters that I want to return in future King of Fighters games. Come back to me, Bon Jeanette. He's a nice host though, since he just lets them fight and ruin his cafe as he stands there like typical Wednesday. Number 7, Moreira from King of Fighters Maximum Impact. This was the same spin-off that Richard reappeared in, so Sori is kind of in this alternate universe of King of Fighters lore. His moveset is near identical to a certain other Fatal Fury Capoeira fighter that I'll be getting to later. He does plenty of spins and handstands, but I'm somewhat confused why he's a cowboy who surfs on his opponent. Meh, at least surfer cowboys are an original concept. Despite that fun motif, he's treated seriously in the anime adaptation of these games. You can tell he is serious because he's missing his fun hat. He takes action by helping save people from a burning building, and then decides to challenge Iori in the middle of it because he pushed a little girl out of the way when he was walking and refused to apologize, that monster. They then drop the whole fight when Sori realizes the fire is going to kill a child, and that's much more important than a meaningless squabble, but it showed that this man has the balls to challenge one of the strongest fighters in the series as an introduction. Number 6, Poopa from Rage of the Dragons. Remember when Double Dragon had a fighting game but the developers could not get the license, so it turned into a Double Dragon inspired fighting game? Well, that was Rage of the Dragons. Poopa doesn't seem to be based on anyone from the original games, so she's just her own character who studies capoeira and wears a cool hat. Her capoeira-based attacks are similar to some of the later entries on this list, with fast kicks that leave her opponent in a constant state of defense, but she adds a secret weapon to her fighting style, a wrench. How many capoeira stars can say they fight with a wrench? Well, not many, since they don't bring a wrench to a foot fight, but you gotta do what you can to stand out. Opponents blocking your low attacks too much? Break their kneecaps with this wrench. I'm not sure if the wrench means that she's supposed to be a mechanic or just a handy woman, but I like her casual design. Put her in the next, who owns her? Oh, SNK. Put her in the next King of Fighters. Number 5, Momoko from King of Fighters. Momoko is the happy-go-lucky, sugary sweet capoeira fighter of the Psycho Soldiers, being the group of teens who have supernatural psychic energy powers. If the capoeira gig never works out for her, she'll at least have these energy beams to fall back on. Her technique is pretty solid though. She has great flexibility to give her a long range on her kicks, and a strong mix-up game with attacks that go overhead into low. Her mind games also come with her attacks that have similar startup animations to keep your opponent guessing if she'll aim high or low. Regardless of which attacks you choose when fighting as her, Momoko's opinions of all of them will be the same. It's fun for her. She looks like she's having a blast with each hit. Her pure joy breaks through into her moveset visuals. As mentioned, she's the enthusiastic, sugary sweet character made up of rainbows and sparkles and gumdrops. Well, that's mostly a metaphor, but the sparkles are real. She's emitting pure sparkle dust from her feet. I'm not sure if it hurts, but it should at least give her an advantage by getting in her opponent's eyes. These are the visual effects I'd expect from a character who has a theme song entitled I Want to Eat Pudding in one of the SNK spin-off games. Number 4, Bob Wilson from Fatal Fury. Bob is the type of character I would have expected Richard Meyer to become if SNK gave him another chance to shine. All of Bob's moves feel like improved and more developed versions of Richard's moves, and for good reason. Bob was scouted out by Richard in Brazil when Richard was trying to find a protege for his two favorite things, pizza and growing cacti. I mean capoeira and his cafes. Though the other two things are also his canon interests. So Richard took Bob under his wing and showed him the ways of capoeira and fine dining. As a fighter, he's a lot more animated than Richard, being a speedy rushdown character who works best with his multi-strike leg-based attacks. The fan favorite attack is likely the one where he spins on his head and goes all helicopter blades. And just like his teacher, he became a successful manager at the second branch of the Pow Pow Cafe, or for bigger events at the main restaurant, he was the assistant manager to Richard. Bob serves beer like a champ. Unfortunately, he also shares the same fate as Richard of being relegated to a background character throughout the King of Fighters games. Still, with his youthful energy and charm, I feel Bob would be the go-to choice for SNK if they wanted to bring Capoeira back in the next King of Fighters. Number 3. Christy Montero from Tekken. Christy is very involved in the Capoeira lore of the series. The original and main Capoeira fighter in Tekken, Eddie Gordo, is relevant to this entry once again. Eddie taught Christy Capoeira, which Eddie learned from Christy's grandfather, but both these significant people were missing by the story of Tekken 4. At this point in the story, her grandfather was incarcerated and suffering from an illness, and Eddie went off to look for the man who killed his father, so Christy entered the tournament in the 4th game to search for Eddie. She always had the exact same moveset as Eddie, since she was just meant to be his replacement when she first appeared in Tekken 4. That always felt weird to me, since Eddie's premiere game, Tekken 3, just had an overhaul with the cast after a time skip. We got a bunch of new characters in Tekken 3 for a new generation of Tekken, so replacing one of those characters one game later felt unnecessary. They've really only initially replaced characters if there's a time skip or if the character was unpopular and they wanted to write them off but keep the moveset. Eddie was a seemingly popular character in Tekken 3, so Christy was a strange addition to me. Eddie was still an alternate skin for Christy in Tekken 4 like Panda was for Kuma in some games, but Christy's story and skin was the default. When they were later separate character slots in Tekken 5 and 6, I still found it hard to distinguish Christy's moveset from Eddie's. They even had the same arcade mode endings in those games. It did make sense since they were both involved in the endings, but they were mostly about Christy. Also, watching those endings back to back messes with your emotions. In Tekken 5, her grandfather's in the operating room, and then it cuts to Christy sparring with Eddie as her grandfather joins in with a smile, so she happily says, "Grandpa!" And then Tekken 6's ending starts with her crying at her grandfather's grave as she somberly says, "Grandpa." That contrast in tone hit me harder than I expected. Despite the similarities, I've generally played Christy in games where both characters are available since I like her energy. She sounds like she's having a lot more fun than Eddie.
You win.
Good night.
Plus, her default outfit is so sparkly, how could that not get your attention? And if it's any consolation, she had a somewhat unique moveset in Street Fighter Cross Tekken, partially because Eddie wasn't even in that game, but hey, it was the only game she was in without Eddie. Street Fighter Cross Tekken Christy adapted the Tekken Capoeira style and combined it with the 2D madness that Capcom crossovers generally bring to the table, and the madness was indeed brought.
Ready to do this? I can do this! Don't worry, just take it slow. Here comes my specialty.
My body!
Too bad, so sad.
One team wins!
Number 2, Elena from Street Fighter. Elena is one of the most carefree characters in the series. She always has fun fighting in a playful sort of way. Instead of a serious feat of strength, she more views this as a fun way to greet people. Sometimes she'll give you a standard hello, but other times she'll ask to show you her dance as an introduction.
I'll show you my dance. You ready?
This is a very unique dance because it makes contact with you, throws you in the air, and leaves you in a state of pain that Elena does not seem to notice because she assumes that you're just tired and lying down as a result.
Why don't we lie down for a while? The weather's nice.
Since Capoeira is leg-based, Capcom took that discipline to the extreme and made all of her punch attacks still use her feet, just as all the boxers in the game use punches even when the kick buttons are pressed. While all of her moves have that dance feeling, my favorite one is where she just lunges across the screen. It feels a lot more aggressive than her other moves, like she's done playing games. I guess that's why she calls it Rhino Horn. I also like that she can get around projectiles by simply sliding at the right time. She doesn't need to learn a projectile of her own or develop something like a green hand to overcome that. She just needs raw flexibility. Speaking of green, her entire family is in tune with nature. They can sense evil or trouble based on the energy the trees are giving off. Her father sensed it in Street Fighter 4, so he was like, "Elena, I've signed you up for a tournament without telling you until right now to find this evil. Welcome to the roster." And Elena is just happy to participate in things, so she was cool with it. The nature also allows her to heal herself, so have fun dealing with that. You can hate that move, but you can't hate Elena. She's just too full of joy.
It was a beautiful dance.
I feel number 1 is expected at this point, with how many times I've brought him up as the main Capoeira rep in his series. Say it with me now, number 1, Eddie Gordo from Tekken. Despite not being the first Capoeira star in fighting games, he's easily the most iconic one. He has so many moves that display the unpredictable and rhythmic nature of the style. It was such a fun moveset that Namco made it 2 more times. Actually, there were some nuances between Christy and Eddie at some points. Eddie allegedly had longer range on some attacks, but the differences seemed very subtle to me. The moveset that originated with Eddie was always fun for masters and beginners alike. Tekken experts prefer all his tools for low and overhead attacks, with near unpredictable setups once he starts switching between his stances, plus he has plenty of ways to juggle after he pops up his opponent. And button mashers love no matter what you would press, he would just keep doing moves continuously that still look pretty fun, though they would get destroyed against any player who knows what they're doing. My favorite moves are any that involve him standing on his head and kicking, and when he does that rotating windmill-like kick that doesn't stop until somebody stops him. As for his story on how he learned Capoeira, it's more than him just going to school. When he was 19, his father was assassinated when trying to stop drug cartels. His father's dying words were for Eddie to falsely admit to the murder since he would be safer in prison from their enemies. When plotting vengeance for his father's death in prison, he was taught the art of Capoeira by an elderly man in the slammer with him, Christy's grandfather. Now feeling indebted to the man, he trained his granddaughter when out of prison, along with entering the tournament in the 3rd game to find the man that killed his father. We soon learn the murderer was Lucky Chloe. Wait, no, that's not right. The murderer was Kazuya, so add Eddie to the list of people who have a vengeance-related beef with the Mishima family. And that's why he looks so serious all the time. He just wants his vengeance, and so far, the series has not given him that sort of justice. Hopefully one day. In the meantime, Eddie has an orphanage to run. He may go missing a lot, but he makes sure to give back to the community. He has a large fortune that he inherited from his father, and he doesn't seem to be abusing it like some other rich fellows in Tekken. So with his skills, influence on the roster, and the noble uses of his money, Eddie cements his legacy as the top Capoeira user in fighting games.
You win.
Now, what did you think? Were all your favorites on this list, or are there a few more Capoeira practitioners that were hiding in some other games? Let me know in the comments. Anyway, thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next video.